Hi, I'm Catherine. I work at Weston College, and this is our research on using the thinking environment. And it's not a needle to thread look at what we did. It's just a snippet and a feel for the experience that we had and what our learners experienced as well. So we want to share our outcomes with you, and we want to also look at how it evolved, because it wasn't just a straight what we're going to do this. It really did, it was an evolution. So I've just passed you on to Neil, and he's going to give you some more information.
Okay, thanks guys, and thanks for all the input this morning. There's been some really interesting content. And from amongst that, some of the common themes that I noted down have been around mindset, confidence, positive manners, real holistic approaches to learning, which are really all consistent with this promoting of learner efficacy and learner agency. And this is why we sort of looked at using the thinking environment, which my colleagues will explain further as we go, to engage exactly that learner motivation. With the main objective, and if you just look on the screen, in 2019, there's only 21.2% of students resitting the maths gain that C or the 4 or above. So the main objective is to increase that. And if we take a step backwards, we can look at the aims. And one of the aims to achieve that objective is to build that motivation and that buy-in from the learners. So I think everybody can appreciate that the more motivated and engaged your learners are, the easier it is for us to facilitate positive learning. And we can do this by sort of breaking down those predetermined barriers that learners come to us with and previous sort of negative experiences, so we can develop that trusting relationship between us and the learners. You know, our jobs are to inspire, not just to deliver content. So and that's supported by sort of Maslow and many others, and that consistency to change a learner's dogma to believe in their self, and that's what we really sort of looked at focusing on. So yeah, next slide please, Catherine. So just some background of the logistics within that. So they're the names of the guys and some pictures from one of our sort of meetup days and the research. And you can see we looked at learners across different vocational areas. It was a mix of 16 to 19-year-olds as well as adults, and from a good range of colleges. You know, there's South Devon, there's Yeovil, Weston, Heart of Worcestershire. So the demographic is quite diverse as well. So that gives us a good insight to the impact of the thinking environment on motivation in maths, which the guys will now sort of talk to you a little bit more about. Thanks.
Hi, so we did obviously the thinking environment, and it's all about a discipline. As you can see, there's 10 components on the right hand side, and if those components are not in place, there's a feeling of discomfort in a room, possibly. I know Lou has sort of talked about when you're going into the rooms, just all have an equal say. Otherwise, you might feel a bit frustrated if you don't have your equal say. But we had Lou gave us the CPD, which was a 3-day CPD over the autumn term. What we did during that time, we practiced the different parts of the thinking environment: the rounds, pairs, dialogues, councils, and incisive questions. And we had a feel for it, and we were able to then go away and practice some of that stuff with our learners. The stuff that came out from that was a round would maybe with a group of learners would be that they had some keywords. They were able to choose their own keyword, sit back, and then choose so for something like factors, multiples, square numbers, cube numbers, something like that. And then they'd choose a memorable number, like their birthday or where they lived, the number in which they lived. And we used those numbers, and we went round and they had to, the person that chose factors had to describe the number that we'd all chosen, one of them, and describe all the factors. So they were able to do that, and they had to do that with intent listening, with all those 10 components in place, and they took it in turns, and nobody was allowed to interrupt. So that was the idea of the thinking round, and that really did elicit sort of, they were able to hear what they didn't know, possibly, you know. So that was the idea for that one. Pairs was done. They loved pairs, especially the functional skills learners. Well, all of them did, actually. They sat in pairs, and they'd sort of have to sit and listen to the other person speaking in their pair. They were given 1 minute each, exactly 1 minute, because I thought it was too much otherwise. And they'd talk about, say for example, I gave them angles to talk about. They'd actually write down everything, or talk about everything they knew about angles, and then that would sort of, you could see the other person itching to say something else and help them, but then they could sort of pile onto when we turned the time around. They were able to pile onto their own information about angles, and then we did a freshest thinking round about what they all knew about angles. So that was a really nice way of sort of introducing a new topic. So what we really did feel, though, when we actually came to the Action Research Day, we weren't sure how we were going to actually look at the whole research, sort of which part would we use, how would we measure it, how would we measure the impact of the thinking environment. But suddenly Tom had done some research, and he came up with this magnificent idea. So I'll let Tom talk about what we did.
So thank you, Catherine. Yeah, so why incisive questions, and what are they? As both Neil and Catherine have alluded to, we did a lot of research looking at studies and interventions done previously on motivation and engagement. We had a particular focus on agency, sort of learners taking control of their learning journey. And one of the things we found was MCII. So this is research that's been done on mental contrasting implementation intentions, which sounds very fancy, but has a much more basic premise, that there's 2 common habits that are unhelpful for motivation. One of those is just thinking about where you want to be, dreaming, and that doesn't provide long-term motivation because those goals seem too distant. The other one is taking too much sort of a self-evaluative stock of where you are, getting stuck in the mud, because then you see all the barriers, but you don't see the way through them. So we looked at incisive questions, which is an aspect of the thinking environment, which involves using the valuable thinking time you get when people are paying good attention to you, to think not just about where you want to be and where you are now, but think about what the barriers could be, the limiting beliefs that are holding you back from achieving your potential, and then how you can get from A, where you are now, to B, where you want to be, by thinking of freeing beliefs, things that can help you get from point A to point B. Rather than explaining what the incisive questions are in too much detail, we thought we'd give you the opportunity to go through and try them. It's the end of the year. It's a good time for reflection. So if everybody's got a pen and paper, we're just going to ask you the 5 incisive questions. This is a cut down version of what we gave the learners. And this is just for you, to help you with your summer development, to help you with your plans for next term. 5 questions, just note down what you think, and then hopefully you'll find this exercise useful. So the first question is, what challenging goal do you want to achieve this year? I'll give you about 30 seconds, a minute to think on each one. Second question is, what more do you want to achieve from this year? And here the slight repetition is important for deeper thinking. The third question is, how could you achieve this goal? So the fourth question, and you can probably imagine some learner responses, What is it that you're assuming that is stopping you from achieving your goal? So limiting beliefs. And the final question, if you knew that you could realistically achieve your goal, how would you go about achieving it? So in our research, we asked learners an extended version of these questions. The idea being that at the end, they've both set themselves a target and some specific actions to work towards meeting that target. And we monitored their responses, which Vicky will tell you more about.
Thanks, Tom. Right, so responses to the questions. So we had two threads which we were able to analyse. One was the incisive questions, which you've just had to go at, and the one was a feedback form, which they completed in subsequent lessons, which included questions: have you completed work towards your action? Do you feel more confident in your action? And do you need more time for action? If you have the Wordle gives an indicator of all the responses recorded from incisive questions part of our research. You won't be surprised to hear that the most common overall response was to pass, whether that be a grade 4 or just to pass, but that was our most common form of our response. The responses were honest and identified personal no time,
Vicky,
too much coursework to complete.
Vicky, you need to turn off your.
Sorry.
You need to turn off your camera because you're getting bad. It's coming.
Okay.
It's
Sorry.
okay. I've done it, Catherine.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I could see it popped up. Sorry.
Apologies.
Is it okay now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Good. Sorry, I live in the middle of nowhere and the internet is not great. So responses were honest and identified personal barriers, such as no time, too much coursework, lack of confidence. They'd had bad previous experiences, no motivation, and even lazy, which I thought was really interesting. Verbal responses were not always fully recorded because they did the incisive questions in pairs amongst themselves, and 16-year-olds don't always write down everything that their partner was saying. I sat with the pairs when I did it with my groups, and it was really, really interesting, and they really value being listened to and the attention that I gave them. A level 2 health and social care group that I worked with were completely disengaged. I tried everything with them, but I feel after I did this, it really helped me to change my relationships with them, with one of the worst disengaged learners going away to the rest of the group and telling them all to go and see Miss and how motivational it was. And she actually sat for the next hour and completed work independently, which was a massive achievement. And before I go through the actual stats, in chat, could you add what percentage do you think actually went away and worked on their set actions? So my group hadn't done any work on actions before. So what percentage action research and the incisive questions do you think went away and worked on their set action? So I've got 50%, 60%, 40%, 65%, 25%, 65%, you are close, 70%, well done, Katie. Catherine, next slide. So as you can see, 2% actually went on to work on their target, with 80% of those feeling more confident. So responses included completed questions, did a little bit, made revision cards, so it really depended on what their action was as to what they went away and did. 20% said they didn't feel more confident, but those responses included, I've had a look at bearings and I feel if I worked on it more, I would feel more confident. So who knows if they would have ever felt more confident. 28% didn't work on their targets, but they could have worked on it in the next round because we did 3 rounds of this. And those responses included, they've been too busy with assignments, which you won't be surprised to hear, and not yet, which to me suggests that they may go on and do it in the future. Responses, unfortunately, when flooding code this year were only from 43 learners because colleges got shut fairly promptly. We thought we could go back in to get incisive question sheets and response forms, but unfortunately we couldn't. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Vicky. So in conclusion, our findings linked back to the research. So we linked back to research by Matthews in 2006, which suggested the importance of giving learners attention, where attention was one of the key components of a thinking environment. The use of the incisive questions allowed us to give learners the ability to pay attention to their own feelings around maths. And we found that when learners worked in pairs with the incisive questions, that was a very helpful exercise, because the learners felt heard in what they were saying to us about how they felt about their maths. So it allowed learners to be heard, and we concluded that from our action research that attention leads to emotional literacy, so the ability to identify their own barriers and then find solutions that are practical to them. So, and it definitely questioned my own sort of understanding of the learners, where I thought learners felt external factors played a huge role, but actually we found the opposite, where they actually, and a lot of times, blame themselves. And that in turn provided that negative responses or refusal identified vulnerability, where our more vulnerable learners were unable to articulate themselves or unable to read their own emotions and give any feedback regarding the thinking environment process, which suggests there that maybe there's an intervention that we can put in place to support those learners in giving that emotional feedback. But overall, we felt that teachers who participated within the CPD felt that they benefited from it and were keen to practice and develop it further. I know from my experience working on the thinking environment, when I've introduced it to classes, you tend to get more from the learner, and the learner tends to talk to you and engage with you on a different level compared to without using the thinking environment. And we felt that it was a beneficial tool that can be applied within a variety of ways. So we obviously focus on the incisive questions, which could be used at the start of the year to identify those barriers and used at certain midpoints, such as Easter, and then towards the summer, towards exam time. But further research within the thinking environment may look at ideas around locus of control, where we could explore whether a learner felt that they had control of their lives or not. As I said earlier, I had the opinion that learners didn't feel in control, where actually a lot of the learners reported the opposite. So, and one of the key phrases that I use is being, do they happen to things or do things happen to them? But I'll quickly pass on to Nick because he's got a few other things. I realise we're running out of time. So Nick.
Many thanks, Matt. Just so to the recommendations, if you follow through to the bottom of the slide, there's a link to an article by Mycroft and Sidebottom. There's a caveat there, I'm not on commission, which was the mechanism by which we undertook this process. And sitting behind that is the book by Nancy Klein, More Time to Think. And of the 10 key components that you've met already, I'd just like to draw your attention to the one that's about information and what that means to you in your head right now, and then what that means in the context of the thinking environment. I will quote verbatim from the book here, More Time to Think. It's chapter 8, and it ends, it's quite lofty. It says, thinking dies in denial, but information resurrects it. And then later on in the same chapter, there's this, the idea of certain questions, the right incisive questions, can dismantle denial. And that's a phrase that really stuck with me significantly, the idea of dismantling denial and what that means. And denial as what is true is not, but what is not true is. And that's the preconceived idea that lots of students come with, the fixed mindset already alluded to today, that we're no good at maths, and that's 80% of our target audience. And later on in the book, Nancy Klein mentions or states that the brain that asks the question often has the answer. And I think, again, I was a bit surprised when I read that, as how obvious it was to me, and yet some time to think about it. And I feel that that level of surprise was also worked out and shared with the adult learners that I was working with. So my recommendations are that it's not there's a caveat there, it's not an add-on, something you can try it. It really is all 10 components, and it then will maybe a paradigm shift in your thinking, and it has been in mine. So that's the recommendations, and I will then pass back to Catherine to close. Many thanks.
Okay, yes, just to finalise, I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and this is our further reading if you'd like to go further, and check out my blog, and may have something in TESS as well coming up. That's it.